It's twofold.
You got to really have some self-accountability to be able to discern what is stuff that it's like your partner's bringing to you and it's time for you to look at, and also to recognize when things are being projected and that's not something that you have to eat and digest. There's a lot of radical self-accountability to know what is actually yours and not, and that discernment is such a critical part.
But we stuck it out. Today's our day.
Here we are, the very first episode of the Steph and Craig Show. And we're super excited. Like beyond excited for this whole entire experience.
We know there are so many other podcasts that you could be listening to, and you chose this one.
We want this podcast to reach as many people as possible. So we will ask you from time to time to do us a solid and just share it with somebody. We're on a mission to help you create better relationships and your best life. It's kind of the big thing behind this podcast is that we all need people. And when we all come together, we can heal together.
On today's episode, we're going to share with you about us. You're going to get to know us a little bit in our journey and how we're here and why we're bringing this to you. And we are going to share with you 2 very practical tips that you can start practicing today to help improve your life and your relationships.
But before we get there, go to steph&craig.co. That's our website. It's steph&craig.co. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter. It's going to be the easiest way to stay in touch with what we're doing and what's coming up with the podcast. Thanks again for being here. And we cannot wait for you to hear the very first episode of the Steph and Craig Show.
Here we go.
There were nights we would fight, no end in sight.
Lock it in. Craig, I need you to slow down and speak louder.
This podcast is brought to you by... So we have been putting everything together for this podcast for, it feels like 12 years. And I guess in some ways it really is,
right? It really
right?
has been,
That's too funny that I said that. That was a slip of the tongue there. But that's what it feels like. Don't smile when I said slip of the tongue. So one of the things that we want to talk about first and foremost is thank you. Like the gratitude that we have for everybody that's listening to this or watching this on YouTube. We are immensely grateful for that. It's one of those things that we've worked incredibly hard at, and we're bringing forth all of our like best advice, insights, life lessons, relationship lessons, pretty much the entire healing journey experience that we've had together in our relationship, as well as over the past several years of working with people. We're going to bring all of it to this podcast, and we're going to share it with you guys in ways that hopefully not just resonate, but that are easily understood, breaking down bigger concepts and ideas in ways that are practical and easy to understand. And what else, babe? Like, what else are we going to do with this podcast? Guests, right? We're super excited for all the people that we have coming on the podcast.
Yes, we have a lot that we're bringing. The good thing is we've taken the long way around a lot of things, which meant that we have a lot of research that we've been able to do because we take the long way, and bringing in guests that are also going to be able to inspire you and also give you practical ways that you can start implementing changes in your life and in your relationships now. And it's going to be funny along the way. It's going to be sad. We're just going to have a great time, and whatever comes up is what comes up while we all heal along the way together.
Yeah, if you've never met us before or you're not familiar with us, we're very funny. We're very hilarious.
Just you wait.
And we're also sometimes all over the place because we talk about all sorts of really challenging, difficult things at times that stir up emotions inside of us. And just like you, we're on our own path here. We're on our own healing journey, and we don't have anything perfected yet. We are learning as we go. We get triggered all the time, oftentimes while we're trying to record and be on the podcast and do all these different things. But one of the things that we bring to every episode, and it's really important to us as well, is the lens of looking through trauma. It's a trauma-informed perspective. And part of the reason why we do that is because it really has changed how we look at our life and how we look at our relationship. We both stem, when I say stem, that's like a phrase that I say oftentimes in my head. We both stem from trauma, like we grew from trauma, but
we were born in the dark.
It's my line, babe. But we have a lot of trauma from our past, both in childhood as well as into our adult life. And that really influences and shapes how we see people, how we see each other, how we see this whole dynamic of life and relationships and everything in between. And that's the other really important thing that we wanted to talk about too before we get going, because we're kind of going to give you an introduction into who Steph and Craig are. And then we're going to share these 2 great tips that we've come up with that we're really excited to talk about. But before we get there, we realize that a lot of people don't actually know who we are. And so we're going to give you a little bit of background of that and where we, like how we met and why we are the people that we are today. But I was talking about the, what was I talking about?
Like along the way, all of the.
I got it now.
You got it? Okay. So resume.
It came back to me finally. This podcast isn't just about your primary relationships. Mm-hmm. We're going to be talking about things through that lens oftentimes, but it's applicable to all relationships in life. So the whole idea is that we're here to heal together, and people are needing people. Like we all know that, I think, to some extent. I know that for a long time I pushed away from that idea that I could do everything on my own and that I didn't really need help from anybody else, and relationships weren't anything. I mean, I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but the whole idea is that this is through the lens of all relationships. Relationships
with coworkers, with parents, with, of course, your primary partner, with your kids, with your friends. Like any of these interactions, there is a relationship. It doesn't mean romantic relationship. We're not just speaking to romantic relationships, although it applies very
much so. Yeah.
And obviously that's the frame of reference that we have with this, that we've been healing together in our romantic relationship and in all of our other relationships in our lives.
So let's tell them who we are. Let's share our story.
We're Steph and Craig.
We have a podcast. So we met 12 years ago. It's 2024, and we actually met in 2011.
We did.
Is this the 13th year?
Yeah, it is actually.
So we met a long time ago. And it feels
far
like
away.
We were it doesn't just feel like we were definitely completely different people back then. And it was at a stage in our life where we were in our early 30s. Barely
30s.
Well, 13 years ago, I guess so. I guess I would have been 30 years old when I met you.
Yeah. I was 31 and thought I was so old.
Right? We thought we were definitely
like, that's it.
Adults.
I'm in my 30s. I'm over the hill.
We definitely knew what
done.
we were doing.
I can't start over in my 30s.
Yeah. And we fell in love. Like we legitimately fell in love really quickly.
Yeah.
And the crappy thing was that we were both still in our first marriages at the time. And so we had to kind of navigate and transition all of that. We met when we were still married to other people, but when we started dating, those relationships were when I say on the outs, I mean, we were both in the process of filing for divorce and going through the whole divorce proceedings and everything like that. We each had children, so we brought 2 kids to the relationship, right? I had 2 kids, you had 2 kids. What else? We started our careers in law enforcement.
We did.
Right?
We did.
I was a rookie cop.
I was a rookie dispatcher.
Right. And that's how we met.
Right.
And a lot of our career, or not a lot of our career, but a lot of our relationship in the beginning, not necessarily centered around those careers, but I mean, that was a big part of our life.
It's a big part of our lives. Yeah.
Yeah. We were each, I think, at a stage in our lives where we were looking for a career. Mm-hmm. I had worked a ton of jobs in my 20s and all sorts of different things to, just make ends meet and whatever. I never really had, quote unquote, a career. And this was going to be it, though. Yeah. Being a cop was going to be my life. And it was, especially, when we met and then obviously started dating and we moved in together. We bought a house together in 2014.
I think it was 13 or 14, yeah.
Yeah. And then it was amazing. Like the first few years of our relationship.
Nothing went wrong.
We
were so healthy.
It was a lot of that honeymoon phase.
Yeah?
No?
Yeah. No, it was. It was just, I don't know.
I know. What are you looking at me for?
I just I don't know that I would describe it that way. I was definitely, I don't know. Yeah, I definitely had a lot of rose-colored glasses on.
We have a different perspective of it now, right?
We do.
Like we look at that time period of our life now and we see how chaotic it was. Mm-hmm. I was very much in activation all the time. Obviously as a police officer, I was like constantly in this state of hyper awareness and vigilance, and very rarely could I relax or, quote unquote, be at peace or calm down. So my nervous system was super activated all the time. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that, being a police officer had that was just like the icing on the cake. My nervous system was always kind of jacked like that. And my life was really crazy. It was full of a lot of chaos, but I didn't really see it that way. I kind of just enjoyed the highs of it all. I was definitely an adrenaline junkie. I liked the excitement of things. Our relationship was really exciting.
It was really exciting.
We had a whole bunch of really like fun, exciting things that happened in the beginning of relationships.
We did.
And meeting you was exciting.
Well, of course.
Right? But the trauma bonding
so
that was
crazy.
taking place, right?
That's like what happened. There was so much of it because I was like, the environment that I was in, I had been a stay-at-home mom and then had just been able to start going back to work and was trying to get some financial stability so that I could create safety for myself and the kids so I could get out of a really bad situation. And then when I got the job as a dispatcher, like how much more safe can you get? Working in law enforcement, working
at the 911 center.
At the 911 center, so that was my career. The same. This is how my children and I were going to be safe, and I was going to be able to support them, and I had help. I had a safety net. So it was very much I locked into that job pretty hard. Like it was my lifeline, and I held on to it, and I knew that I just needed to be as good at it as possible, be invaluable so that I could, I always had that safety. And so it was pretty important to me too. And then our excitement and liberation that came too, my sky got painted it went from being like very hopeless in a sense and very patternistic. This is the childhood that I had. This is the life that my parents had. This is the marriage that I had. This is now how I was raising my kid. And then to get out of that, to start breaking out. And then when I got pieces in place that I was liberating myself and my kids from this. And then, already here's this possibility. And then in came Craig, and it was just like hope, possibility. Everything was just magical. It was a lot of magical thinking.
So much magical thinking.
Because it was more than I went from being hopeless to having experiences and safety and love that I didn't even know to hope for, which is a recipe for extreme attachment, extreme trauma bond,
all
complete
really,
magical
really,
thinking.
We were oblivious to all of this at the time.
Right.
But it was very much and we've talked about it. We talked about this recently too, where it was how much programming we have from Disney shows and media.
Mm-hmm.
And my story is I rescue women, and
I still feel every time I'm like, ugh.
You don't like that?
Well, I was so resistant to that because it was I can't count on anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I have to handle it. And then that's exactly what happened though. You came in and rescued, but in my brain, I was, you know what I mean?
It's always both, right?
And then
it's
and
always
then it
both.
turned
It's not
to,
just one thing.
I felt completely, I felt powerless again, and then felt like it was very much, you did this.
Right.
You rescued. And that became my story for a while. I took away my own power of my own choices and the actions and the life that I had created in that space, and was no, it was all because of you. You did it. The damsel of me wasn't able to do it herself. So that's why I'm resistant. I'm
We're going to be sharing a lot about our relationship on this podcast because we learned so many things. This time period that we're talking about right now, it was amazing. There were so many parts of it that were just really beautiful because we were falling in love with each other and we were spending time together with our kids, and especially when we bought our house and we started trying to create that. We see it now through such different lenses, right? But all of our kids, we had two daughters that were the same age. They were 10 or 11 years old when we met. And then I had a teenager. I got a sneeze coming. We'll see if it sticks around or not. And then our youngest was a 6-year-old little boy. So we had this range of children that we thought, we could just blend everything. Oh,
it was bless you.
That was so funny.
Like that was you went for it.
Right.
You embodied
that. Was a dad
that.
sneeze.
That was a cute.
Have you seen those ones? Those
Yeah.
reels were, it's funny. But it was a beautiful time in some ways where we were really trying to make everything work. And we had this perfect picture that we both were kind of painting and trying to create.
Not even trying to create. I knew we were creating it.
Yeah.
I knew.
And we did in some ways, but in other ways we didn't.
Yeah, it was a miserable.
It was a chaotic mess. And if you've ever blended families before, you know how challenging that is. And we'll probably do some podcast episodes on that because that dynamic is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
But we were oblivious and we were really naive to it. And we thought that everything was just going to be fine and that we could make it all work.
We thought we could love hard enough, love enough, and just bring all this unity, like completely not giving enough like anonymity and individual exposure.
I don't even think like during that time, our relationship, like if you think about the first few years of our relationship, even though we can see it now through the lens of like, oh my God, the trauma bonds and the codependency and the, all of these behaviors and actions that were taking place. But like if we were to drop back into those moments and talk to Steph and Craig, like it was great. Yeah. Does it not feel that way?
No, I that's your story, and I'm so glad. For me, it wasn't.
Okay.
Like there was all this, but I felt very. I felt like I didn't have say in anything. Like there was a lot of like I didn't have like there was I had possibility and hope and like so different, and I was so grateful. But I felt like I didn't get say in things because I had to be just like pouring gratitude and just so grateful for this new life. So there was a lot of goodness, but there was a lot of pain inside me that I was just trying to keep quiet. There was a lot of me that I felt like I didn't get to express or explore because I had to not fuck this up.
Like Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Do you feel like, do you have awareness?
I don't know, I'm getting nervous.
Does 2013 Stephanie and 2014 Stephanie think like that and feel like that? Or is that just through the lens of today? It's okay. I'm genuinely curious.
I don't think I didn't have the verbiage for it. I didn't have the the ability to speak to it, but I felt like stifled a lot, and I was really scared. I was scared to move forward. I was just really scared. I was scared a lot of times. I was terrified to be in a relationship again that I was afraid, like I didn't want to mess it up, but I was also afraid because like my patterns were I can't speak up, right? So I just played that role. Like I can't speak up. I don't have a say. And it went from being at risk of violence that I had to be quiet to risk of losing that I had to be quiet. So, and then I had such little trust in myself. I had completely lost all trust in myself that I would, when I felt like I wasn't okay with something, I would just dismiss myself with that and be like, well, I'm wrong because of this. Clearly I'm not thinking right. I'm not acting right. I don't understand. And like, you know what you're doing. So I did have awareness of like it was rough. It was rough, but it wasn't like I didn't know how to do it different at the time. I didn't know how to really use my voice until I would get upset, right? Until it was like to the part I didn't know how to say, hey, this isn't actually working for me. I don't agree with this. I don't want to do it this way. And I kind of feel like when I would try, like, you know, how does it feel like of that? Like when you hear about me saying like speaking up for that, and like we had a really good mentality of like, I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing, and you very much felt like you did know what you were doing. And so that went into a really good pattern of, I'll just shut down because this is the better option.
Yeah, you just defer to me all the time.
I just defer to you all the time. Mm-hmm. And so that was hard that was hard, you know? Of course, it was like more copacetic, I guess. There was like things were going well, but inside it was building up. Inside it was like getting harder. Inside resentments were building.
I bet there's so many people that can relate to this.
Yeah.
Because this dynamic we were stuck in, and we still are in it at many, many times, because this is the whole thing is like, and this is why I'm glad that this is coming up, because we talk like this all the time in our relationship where we have awareness of like, we have done so much internal work over the course of the last 13 years now. I used to think it was 12 years, but turns out I just didn't do the math. Well, we started dating in 2012, so it is 12 years that we've been together. But we've known each other for 13 years, which is really cool. Anyways, we look at things through this lens now where we can see how our past is shaped and molded so much of our actions and behaviors. And so many things that we grew up with, the environment of our homes, the way that we were raised, the trauma that we experienced, all of these things shaped and molded us, obviously. And I think a lot of times, I know that I thought this way for a long time, where I had awareness that like, yeah, that affects you. And, you know, of course you're going to not necessarily repeat patterns. I didn't have that awareness, but everybody knows that like your childhood influences and shapes the adult that you are today. But to the depth and to the degree and to the way that it shows up and the subconscious shadow aspects of it and all of that kind of stuff, I was so oblivious to. So during that time frame in our life, when that, you know, in the beginning of our relationship, one of my, it's really challenging for me to speak to it from, like, I have to speak, I shouldn't say I have to, but I choose to oftentimes speak through this healed lens of awareness that I have today, where I can see where that behavior was coming from. I can see where those actions and choices of mine, you know, what was shaping and influencing them at the time. But the reality of it at the time, I did think I knew a lot. I did think that I was like, not to say I knew everything, but the way that I would move through life was that I had all of the answers. And that even if it was something that I didn't know the answer to, I wouldn't necessarily admit to that. Like, I'm trying to think of an actual example, but I'm sure there's countless examples, right? You're like, this morning, there's 5 that I could list off. But it was such...
That's really cute. You're just cute. I love you.
But it's the truth of it is, that was how I was behaving and acting in our relationship, where I was controlling and I was, you know, I would not just defer to me. You wouldn't just defer to me. I would be like, no, like, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. This is why we're doing it this way. I mean, oftentimes I would articulate my thoughts and I would say why I would think that this was better or that this was the thing that we were going to do. And we're talking about it in this, I mean, it came down to like everything, right? Like where we were living, which house we were getting.
Literally.
The decisions that we were making with our children, all of these kind of things. And that level of control is really toxic and really like unhealthy to be in and to live in. But, and this isn't like, I think this is a lot of times what happens.
We've come a long ways.
We have come a long ways. And one of the things that we look at, like, we literally look at everything now through this lens of inner child work, where everything is through this space of like, we're just these broken, wounded, innocent children that got hurt a whole bunch over the course of our lives and had all of these traumatic experiences that they had to learn how to cope and manage and survive through. And the way that we did that as children is all of these coping mechanisms and all of these programs and all of the ways that we were taught by our, you know, adults that we were being raised by. And it's not excusing the behavior of shit that happens that's really hurtful and terrible and abusive and, you know, toxic in our relationship. But it also, you know, we're a decade in now. We're about to celebrate our 9-year anniversary, our marriage anniversary. And it's like you can have awareness of where behaviors stem from because of childhood things. And then at some point you have to, and it's funny that it's coming up because that's one of the big things that we're going to get to is these two things that are super important. And the first one is just radical accountability. You have to be accountable for your actions. You have to be accountable for the choices that you make as an adult. And at that point in my life, I didn't have like the lens had not been lifted from my eyes to see that I was behaving in this toxic way. I was behaving in the way that I thought was best. And I know the way that I was thinking. I thought that I was trying to create a safe place for everybody. I was trying to, like, anytime that you would feel nervous about something or a decision or a choice or not trust yourself or all of these things that, you know, were behaviors that you would show and that you would exhibit, my way of fixing that for you is to fix it, is to answer that question, is to have the solution. And I think there's so many couples like that. I think that dynamic is super prevalent in relationships where there's going to be somebody who pretends to be the know-it-all and they're a person that is like controlling everything in the relationship. And that word control, I think, doesn't get used often enough. I think the reality is that there's usually somebody who controls the relationship and somebody who is like the passenger in the relationship.
Yeah.
And the reason that was the way for us is because, again, we know now where it came from and why we were like that from childhood.
Yeah, one of the things that people are common to do.
Thank you for talking. I felt really stupid.
Oh, no, I think you're doing a really good job. Like one of the things that is really common from people with traumatic backgrounds, whether it's traumatic childhood or traumatic previous relationships, is that they associate trauma, toxicity, unhealthiness with that. Like they know what it looks like because that's what they lived. And beyond that, there's not as much of awareness. So once you are able to get out of a situation like that, if you aren't doing inner work, if you're not getting therapy and having help, which is so, so important, you literally don't have the tools to understand what the next relationship looks like and unhealthy traumatic events in it or toxic events. Because you say, if it doesn't look like this, like for me, it wasn't abusive. It wasn't violent. I didn't have to like worry about a lot of this really chaos, life-threatening issues. So therefore, this was a healthy relationship. The problem was me. This was a healthy relationship. Because if it just doesn't look like it did, if it looks different, you think it's better or healthier. And there's a whole lot there that gets to learn. And not only was it just, oh, Craig's controlling, but I knew my role and I played my role very well, you know, coming into that and being very passive, you know, holding resentments, feeling like I couldn't trust myself, trying to take fault for everything. So everybody else was liberated and therefore everybody else was safe because I could direct all of it at me, which meant protection, 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 protection. And then if it was like I was the only problem, everybody else was safe, including you, because then you didn't even have to be mad at yourself, which could cause, you know, all of these things. I knew how to be in a very abusive relationship, and I did not know how to not be in one because I thought without help that all you had to do is remove yourself from the dangerous relationship, the dangerous environment, and then everything got better. That was all the work that you needed to do was just not be with that person. Had no idea all of the inner work that I needed to do, all the patterns and that wounded inner child that needed to be loved, seen, heard, validated. I just thought I just had to remove myself and then everything would get better. And then it didn't work. And I was batshit, like I was all broken up and I'm like, ah, you know?
Yeah. And then it didn't work. Huh?
Yeah. And then it didn't work. And
there's so many times where we do something like read a book, go on a retreat, have some new level of awareness, go to therapy. That was a big
deal for me.
Like there's so many of these big life-changing things. And then we're like, hey, that didn't work. That didn't fix me. What the hell? It's so frustrating.
Or like, this is the thing. I didn't even have awareness that this was the thing though. I didn't have awareness that like only thing I thought I had to do was get a job, be financially secure to provide for my kids and myself, and get out of the violence. Like that was my ticket right there. No more violence, financially secure, no longer dependent. and I was able to make choices and healthy. And so and then everything was fine because I'd never seen anybody else do that.
Right.
My mom didn't do that. I didn't have so when I was like, that's what's needed. Now everything's better. Why isn't everything better? What's all this shit? What's all this trauma now we got to look at?
It's like as soon as you get safe and your nervous system can take a deep breath and relax, then it's like, cool, let's start healing now.
Right.
And then your nervous system. And that's literally what happened in our relationship, I think, where we both settled into like, quote unquote, our relationship a few years in, and we are in love, and we get married in 2015. And
that was hard for me.
Yeah, I remember.
That was hard for me. And I imagine it was hard for you too, even though you didn't act like it was.
I mean, it was hard for me because I was so scared that it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
Like I think we both came to the relationship being like, cool, we're never getting married again. We're just going to.
We were so adamant about that.
Yeah.
We were both like, we're never getting married. Like we be together, we're not getting married.
And we would talk about it. Like we're just going to keep it real for the rest of our lives. We're going to move in together. We're going to raise kids together. We're going to create this entire life together.
But we get to leave whenever we want.
We're just not.
Nobody's stuck.
We're just not getting married.
Yes.
And then I proposed. Probably.
And then I wanted you to propose.
I know, right?
That threw me. I was like, what's happening?
It's so funny, the level of because I think about that too, where it's like a love story, you have to get married, right? And it's not to say you have to, but like I wanted to get married.
I wanted to get married too.
Right.
Until it was time to get married. And I thought we were going to have a really long engagement. I'm like, it's fine. We're going to be engaged forever. And then you were like, how about 4 months from now? I was like, oh my God. It was hard. I think I just started breaking.
Proposed in like December of 2014, and then we got married in April of 2015.
Yeah.
And it's funny because
so fast.
We look at this now where
I'm almost getting nervous now. I'm like, that's so fast.
Like you remember it. We got married in our backyard underneath a magical willow tree, and we had a beautiful ceremony. And then we went on this great honeymoon that was super awesome.
Yes.
And then when we came back from all of that, I got fired from being a cop. And that began so many different things. And I think it's what happens a lot of times in life, where you'll have these big things that happen, right? People will get fired, you'll go through divorces, death, bankruptcy, like there's illness, all of these really big things in life that are catalysts for change. And they're really hard to go through and navigate, especially considering like what we were just kind of talking about how much of a train wreck we both were subconsciously, right? We thought we had our shit together because we were like married and we had good jobs and we had a home and we had 2 cars.
I thought you had your shit together. I didn't think I did.
Really?
And you thought you had your shit together and didn't think I did.
It's not that I didn't think you didn't have your shit together.
No,
I very
it's just
much
like the roles that we played.
I thought you had your shit together.
Did you?
Yeah.
I sure shit didn't.
Yeah.
I was trying, but I was like, why is this not coming online yet?
No, I
why
thought
is
you
it
had
still
your shit
like
together. And when I got fired, everything just went off the rails, and it was a huge shift for us. It was there were so many layers to it, where it was financial hardship, right? Because obviously that's what happens when you get fired. It was this really emotional thing because I was so, in some ways, trauma bonded with the guys that I worked with, right? Because some of the experiences that we went through and whatnot.
How could you not be?
I had this really close-knit group of people that I worked with that I just loved and cared for dearly. And I had to go through, if we came back from our honeymoon in April, and then I think it was like 2 months worth of being on admin leave, where I was no longer I couldn't function as a regular police officer. So I was just like busy doing work around the office and things like that, because I could still come into work in order to get a paycheck, but I wasn't acting as an actual police officer. And everybody treated me massively different. And I became like this, what's the word? Like a piranha. That's not the word, but
a leper? Is that
whatever.
Like the right thing
like
to
nobody
use.
wanted to be around me. Nobody wanted. It's like I had a stink on me that nobody wanted a part of.
You were marked.
Yeah, and I get it. I remember what that felt like when that would happen to other officers and things like that. And so it just was this really traumatic experience to go through, and then finally being fired. and not knowing what to do with life and not knowing where to go. And everything just kind of started falling apart. When I was going through all of those things, that's when like all of my terrible coping mechanisms come out. I got super into alcohol. Were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
And drank a lot. I mean, it was like a daily occurrence of going down and getting beer and, you know, doing yard work / an opportunity to just be outside and drink beer. Luckily, we got to smoke as much as we wanted. So we were smoking a ton. It was just everything. There was so much that was starting to unravel in our relationship because of this chaos.
Yeah.
And it was really hard. It was really hard to navigate.
Yeah. It was really, really, really hard. There was all these things were definitely coming to a head. Like there had been traces of it. There had been traces of it and like glimmers, I guess, of, oh, this is an issue. This is an issue.
Not good glimmers.
Not good glimmers, but yeah, I didn't know what else to say. But there had been all of these things that like my spidey senses were like, oh, and then, you know, this, and then it just continued. It just exacerbated everything. It was like gasoline on the fire. And I felt like I had to like dig in deeper and really like hold it down, hold it together, and just be as like everything just got shut off and shut down and stuff down and stuff down. And are you okay? And trying to keep working and this
trying
crazy...
to navigate like the like my mental health. Like that was a big concern. I'm sure at some point for you and probably other people was the state of my mental health, whether or not I was going to hurt myself, whether or not I was going to, you know, who knows what this guy is going to do at this point because of how challenging, like that happens where officers get fired or lose their job and then they kill themselves. So that was I'm sure probably did you have that concern?
Yeah, I was worried about it for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so weird. And I didn't know like how to do it. Like I didn't know how to do any of it. And I had my own like anger and frustration and then just fear. There was just so much like sickness is the only way I can think of it. I just felt sick all the time. It was just, everything was scary. Everything was sick. Everything was spiraling out and it just kept getting worse and worse. And I had to just keep going and I had to keep pretending like everything was okay. And I had to keep trying to be okay. And meanwhile, it's just like everything's spiraling out. You're spiraling out. Our lives are falling apart. And I got to show up for work and be okay. And everything's okay. Yeah. Everything's okay until it wasn't.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so hard. Like we hate talking about this time frame in our life because it was such a dark period.
Yeah.
And there was so much pain involved with it. But I mean, it was like alcohol and addiction and infidelity. And I probably got into gambling. Gambling's another one of my coping mechanisms. All of these things to just push away all of the pain and all of I mean, we can look at it through the lens now where I have terrible coping skills when it comes to emotional regulation. Like I don't know how to feel and process really hard emotions. And so that was a time period where there were a ton of really hard emotions to try to feel and navigate. And I don't have skill sets for that. And I didn't have skill sets for it at the time. Well, I did. I just had really unhealthy ones.
Yeah, you knew what to do. It just didn't.
I definitely had skill sets.
Alive, yeah.
But they were
you had your go-to coping mechanisms on how to survive this.
Exactly. And they were all really, really toxic and hurtful and painful to everybody, including me. And that's what I did. You know, that's what people do.
Yeah.
Is they go to their bag of tricks. And if their bag of tricks is all these really terrible, toxic, terrible things, then that's what they're going to use. And that's what happened.
Yeah.
What else do we want to talk about or say about that time? Because we made it through.
We did make it through.
By the skin of our teeth sometimes.
Yeah, we both had to make big changes and like just being aware. I don't know. I'm just trying to think. I'm like, we had very different trajectories of where we were going. You know, you were going one way and I was just doubling down and with my work until.
Yeah, I wasn't getting a new job in law enforcement. I wasn't out there looking for some sort of career. The other thing that we haven't mentioned or talked about was all along the way too, like when we met, our spiritual journey began, our journey into the deeper understanding of, you know, everything
Yeah.
began at that time period too. And so right along the way, we're going through all of this stuff. We're relying upon some of this deeper connection that we believe that we have with each other, as well as the universe and all of these other really amazing things. And my plan was to stay in that realm and be it's so funny because
say it.
Well, I don't even know how
You
to
can say it.
Right? It's like I was going to help people. I was going to be a spiritual practitioner and help people with, their problems through that lens, and using theta healing and all these different readings and things like that. And we were going to fairs and having all of these different events, and I was digging it. Like, it was super fun.
You're
and
really
exciting.
good at it.
Yeah, it's a good, it's a skill set, but going from like a career where you have insurance and you're making money and doing all of these things, and then
I just broke my
working on the
crystal.
weekends at, spiritual fairs, reading,
Right.
it just wasn't financially going to work.
It wasn't working
in
at
the
that
beginning.
point. Yeah.
So
You were doing that, and I was going into just as much of it, but I wasn't looking, like, my thing was like I was going to help myself.
yeah,
Like, I wanted to help other people. I wanted to do that, but I was like, I'm going to fix all of my sad emotions. I'm going to fix all my reactive emotions. Like, I thought being evolved and being healed meant that you could do whatever you wanted, and I didn't get affected by it. I was no longer her. I didn't have to feel the pain because I just needed to be more open. And so it was gaslighting the fuck out of myself, and also, like, getting gaslit along the way of this is what is expected. And so I dove in so I could fix me, but I was just trying to meditate and energy heal and, like, take away all of the pain so that I could just take more, so that I could take the pain, like, not feel the pain, be above the pain. Nothing else had to change except for I just needed to quit being so reactive, and because I was the problem. And, like, I spent a long time really working on that. And that breaks my heart for me to see that, like, I'm like, that's like, I just want to, like, wrap that girl up and be like, oh, honey, no, you were, it's just, and I think that because of the circles that I was in, because of the people that I knew, I'm not the only one, right? That's a lot of how people start, and they just think they're not supposed to be reactive. And if they're reactive, they're a problem. If they're reactive, then they're not really centered. They're not supposed to be reactive to anything anybody says. And I'm like, that's not exactly true. How you choose to act is the thing. But when somebody's hurting you and violating you, and you have a reaction, and you choose, like, to have boundaries, like, that's the healthy choice. But I was like, I'm not supposed to have any boundaries, and I'm not supposed to have any reactions. And I just kept, like, drinking that and shoving it down my throat and trying until, like, I had a breakdown. I had a breakdown at work. I had I had it in my lieutenant's office, and she's the only one that knew about the hardships in our relationship, because I just fell apart in her office, which is not the place to do it. But she was a very kind woman and helped me get some help in that moment. And that was when I started. That was the first time I went to therapy, when we were together. And I don't know if you know this.
I don't think I do, actually.
Oh my gosh. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Fucking let's go.
I fucking lost it in her office.
Yeah. I'm like, you went to therapy?
I did. Oh my gosh, this is like a big deal. And I didn't realize, like, I'm going to cry. And I didn't realize that this is something that I had never brought to you. But everything came out about what we were experiencing in our relationship, because I couldn't keep it in anymore. And I was keeping it all in, all of the secrets, all of the, like you said it before, the addiction, the infidelity, everything. And I broke. And she called in the mental health. And I started during work, so that you didn't know, would go to therapy in Salt Lake, and was trying to get help because I was crashing.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that.
I think I was too scared for you to know that I even had told her. because I had to protect you. Nobody could know that you were doing anything, you know, it was like this way. So, I'm really sorry that I didn't like, are you okay right now hearing that?
I am absolutely okay. You have nothing to be sorry for.
I recognize that, like, I would not have been like, here's the thing. It's just like, I just realized this is something you didn't know, but I didn't know that.
That's okay.
Like nobody else at work knew I was going to therapy. I was like running errands. I was doing things like for training.
There's no shame in it,
like
sweetheart.
she had me
You
in
know,
that
you were
moment.
doing what you needed to do to get through that.
I know. I'm not shameful of it. I'm just having complete compassion of realizing that that's never something that I told you, and I didn't recognize it because we've never talked this deep. Like if you're longtime listeners of Craig and Steph from the Energy is Love, you might be like, I haven't heard that story. And if you're new to Steph and Craig, you know, this is the first time that it came out.
We're going to be bringing lots more to this podcast.
So I'm just like having compassion for you. It's like, you didn't know that.
Yeah.
And then another, like I ended up with, I kept like trying to just be okay and like ingest and not like let out, and got to the point where I ended up with like stroke-like symptoms at work on the radio.
Yeah, your body just straight shut down.
I couldn't take any more.
Do you remember? Because you were also getting like your body broke out in hives
I had
everywhere.
hives for a year. I had it, but not at that point. I'd only had hives for a few days before my body was like, I was literally allergic to my life. Everything just stopped.
Yeah, and like I got a phone call from a guy that I used to work with that's like, you need to get up here. And because you were like, it sounded like you were stroking out on the radio as you were talking to people, slurring your speech and everything like that. And your face was going numb.
And I thought that I didn't realize how, I thought I just needed, everything was like, just keep going, just push harder, just push harder. They're like, do you need an ambulance? I'm like, don't you call an ambulance. We're fine. Just keep going. I didn't even know that like I was now endangering other people.
That was such a freaky day.
I was like, you're all fine. We're doing this. Let's go. Like beeping out domestics. What is she saying?
So you ended up, I ended up bringing you home. We didn't go to the hospital that night.
Yeah.
And I was watching you over the night and everything. And then in the morning you woke up and it wasn't much better. And like you couldn't even like walk to the bathroom. I had to like help you walk. And like
I have very little memory.
Your face was totally numbing out on one side. And I was like, okay, we got to go to the emergency room. And even then we didn't go. Like we were so silly the way that we handled all of that.
I remember we ended up at the university.
Well, what happened was because we had a friend. She was a nurse at it was like at a
we're very
doctor's
much,
office.
We don't go to the doctors.
Yeah, we don't go to the doctors. We don't go to the emergency room. We're not going to go. And so we go to our friend at the doctor's office. And she's like, you need to go to the emergency room. She's like, take her to the University of Utah right now. So, okay. So we went into there and spent the night at the ER where they tried to figure out what was going on with you.
Yeah.
And they couldn't figure out what was going on.
I just remember extreme pain. Like I was in so much pain.
Mm-hmm.
But I have I slept. I don't know if they like made me sleep or what, but I just remember
Yeah. So we spent the night in the ER, and they didn't have a diagnosis. They couldn't
Nobody
tell
could
us
ever
anything.
figure out what it was.
So we're like, cool. We'll just go home and hope this doesn't.
Hope I don't
happen
again. So that was started to be like a shift. Like there were things, and then I don't know how long it was after that.
It wasn't too long after that. It seems
I like had another emotional breakdown, and was like, I'm quitting dispatch. I'm going to massage school. I'm changing my life. I'm changing my life.
Yeah.
And I stopped. Like I didn't just like, all of a sudden I'm not healed, right? Or that was a journey. There's a lot more that you get to learn, but that's like when I was like, no more. Things are changing now.
Yeah. Everything. I mean, so we get married in 2015 and everything starts falling apart like almost immediately after we got married, which was really funny. And then in 2017, I went on this men's retreat that was a big catalyst for me and a lot of change for me, and started to open me up to dealing with my emotions and looking for ways to feel emotions and process emotions. And
was it 2017?
Mm-hmm.
Because so I quit dispatch before you went on the retreat.
I don't remember that part.
I quit in 2017.
Was it?
Uh-huh.
Well, yeah.
I quit. decided February that I was leaving and put in my notice.
And
Or
then
no,
started,
it was March 12th. It was March 12th because it was my grandma Webb's birthday.
Yeah, and then started massage school like 2 weeks later. And all of this started
In April.
Opening us up to all of these new things and new awarenesses, and really the healing journey began. And it was like, what happened was we were trying to heal the things that had come up during our relationship and that we were trying to navigate. And then in 2020, we started therapy. And that was when everything kind of like, oh, we got to heal from like birth onwards.
Yeah.
We can't just skip to the 30s. We had to each start going back into our childhoods and start going through that process of unpacking all of those things. And that has shaped so much of how we look at life now. Yeah. That's why everything is kind of through this lens of trauma and how it has shaped and molded our nervous system and our brains and our ability to, navigate hard things and move through life and all of our coping mechanisms. And that's begun this journey that we're on now and what we're bringing through the podcast to share with everybody. And like today's episode is about these two things that are super important that we think are massively like critical to healthy long-term relationships. And
it's the two things that you can start now. You can start today.
I
think we need to get into it.
So the first one is radical accountability.
And I just like caveat here. When you hear these two things, if you're like, yeah, I heard that, been there, done that, and tune out, I mean, you can choose to, but we invite you to challenge that because we're going to get into a little bit, and maybe we're going to bring it up in a way that you haven't quite heard before or that's relating, because I would have done that. Accountability and I would have just like brushed past
Glossed over it.
So we're inviting you to hang in there with us and like, let's see where this goes and see where it goes for you.
So we gave you some examples earlier of what our relationship looked like when it came to accountability. Steph would project everything inwards and kind of take the role of trying to take all of that stuff in so that she could be the one, protecting everybody else through that lens. And I would just project everything out and not take any accountability. And
it was both control.
Right.
I thought I was controlling the experience, the outcome, the environment by handling where it went. And you thought you were controlling the experience, the outcome, and the environment. So we were both controlling in that, just from very different ways with,
So when we talk about being accountable and having like this ability to be radically accountable, meaning like honestly, truthfully accountable for your actions, you have to have a really good understanding of what your story is. You have to have a really good understanding of what your makeup is. And it's not just, this is, you ask a lot of people what their childhoods were like or what their family were like growing up. And they're like, oh, it's so fine. Everything was okay. It wasn't too bad. Because you don't really look at it through this lens of what trauma actually does to a child.
Like, say that for a second. What trauma actually is trauma is, I have it down here. So it's an emotional response to a terrible event. It's an emotional, like trauma, because people are like, what is trauma? They define it by actions and what it is for like them, but not to them, but to other people. So you'll find people that will judge other people and say, is this a traumatic event? Does this person get to qualify that as a traumatic event? Yes or no? Because we have blocks up in there. But all that trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event. And how you respond, your emotional response and what is terrible for you is whether or not it's a traumatic event. So nobody can tell anybody else whether or not their event, their experience was traumatic or not.
Yeah, it's up to the individual.
It's up to the individual.
And we had a lot of it that we were unaware of. And that was kind of the first step to actually being able to be accountable, is taking an honest look at what your nervous system is. Are you in an activated state on a regular basis? Do you have the ability to be truthful with yourself even? Are you lying to yourself? All of these kind of things that people will do in order to avoid accountability, they come from somewhere. Those coping skills and that story that you have around being accountable and telling the truth starts somewhere. It starts in your childhood. So good questions to ask yourself are like, did you lie a lot as a kid? What would happen when you would tell the truth? Like, I know personally, I lied all the time as a kid. That was like my MO, was to create fantasy and stories about things, even into like as an adult. And, like I would pretend to not be other people. But one of the things that when I was a kid, when I was 18 and I graduated high school, I moved away for a short time. And when I moved to I moved to Minnesota, the job that I got, because my first name is Michael, they thought that that was my name. They thought that I went by Michael. And so everybody was calling me Michael when I showed up. And I'm like, cool, I'm going to be Mike. So I created this other version of myself. And it was very much like me just pretending to be somebody that I wasn't. And I mean, I've always lied from a very early age because I was taught to lie. And I was taught how to lie in all of these kind of different ways. But that was understanding that I had to eventually start to unpack and look at. And then it made sense why I avoided accountability at all costs, because I, was taught to do exactly that, not be accountable.
There's like another, that's big. Like that's big to sit with.
I mean, yeah, just thinking about it from that lens of like, what did you do as a kid? Did you tell the truth a lot? And what would happen if you told the truth?
And also, like, as a kid, was everything made to be your fault? Or did you watch everything get put on with your safe parent or the safe caregiver? Does everything on them, was everything their fault? So being like radically accountable also means not taking accountability for actions, choices, and behaviors that are not yours.
Yeah.
So being radical about it, you can't take the blame for everything. You're very much responsible for your own choices, your own actions, and your own behaviors. But you are not responsible for the behaviors and the actions of others.
That's really
and
big
it's
too.
really, that was a hard one for me.
Right. Because that was your programming.
Yeah.
That was your story.
Responsible for everything. Absolutely.
So that's the very first thing is like, you can't start being truthful and honest and take accountability until you're really truthful and honest about your past and where you've come from and what your makeup is. The next thing about when it comes to, this is like it's a double-edged sword, because you hear this all the time where your partner's your greatest mirror. And we believe that too, where it's not just your partner, but it's people that you're in relationship with. The world around you is mirroring back to you the things that upset you and that activate your nervous system and that trigger you. And so you have to be conscious and aware of that so that you can use that skill set or use that dynamic to then be accountable for those things that are being activated and triggered. Because this is what I will do with you. I will, and I mean, I'm literally doing this today as we speak, right? Like this morning we were navigating some difficult things in our space, and I was doing exactly this, where I was projecting my inability to process my emotions and feel my emotions, and I was projecting it out onto you. And what that looks like in my brain is I'm just like nitpicking everything that you're doing, and everything that you're doing is upsetting me. And I'm getting so frustrated by the way that you're choosing to move through an experience and the way that you're choosing to do things. And so I would oftentimes in the past, I would start a fight, or I would, say those things, or I would go through all of that verbally with you out loud, as opposed to just like doing the best that I can to process, like, what are you showing me right now? Right. I'm uncomfortable. I'm anxious. I'm fearful, all of these different emotions that are hard for me to feel. And so that's the way that we work with the mirroring a lot now, where, when I catch myself trying to project onto you, it's like, what is it that I'm not wanting to feel inside? What is it that I'm avoiding looking at? And then vice versa, where there's often times where you will project things onto me that I actually need to look at, that I actually am avoiding as well.
Right.
And so it's my opportunity.
Your partner will hold you accountable and be a mirror.
Yeah.
So it's like
it's twofold.
You gotta really have some self-accountability to be able to discern what is stuff that it's like your partner is bringing to you and it's time for you to look at, and also to recognize when things are being projected and that's not something that you have to eat and digest. There's a lot of radical self-accountability to know what is actually yours and not. And that discernment is such a critical part.
But it's both. Like that's the really slippery hard thing is there's plenty of times where you're pointing directly at the thing that I'm not being accountable for, or that I'm not addressing, or I'm not dealing with. And in doing so, it's also something that you are not being accountable for, and that you're not addressing, and that you're not dealing with.
Yeah, there's times we'll say it too. It's like, I can see it in you because I'm doing it too. I can see it in you because it lives in me.
Yeah. And so having awareness of that mirroring effect that takes place in relationships really helps with this accountability, because you can, it becomes like a hack where you can see on the inside. It's like you get behind the curtain of how things are working, and you can make sense of like, oh, this is why that's coming up, or this is why that behavior continues. And when you start to really understand your partner and learn about their past and their relationships and it's like their chemical makeup of who they are, then it all starts to make sense, right? Like we said earlier at the beginning, where we see the beginning of our relationship through such different lenses because we've done so much work together. And so I see why you were behaving the way that you were back then, right? I see how your childhood and your life and your previous relationships made you that way, right? That's like the makeup of Steph is this, and vice versa. So it makes so much sense. There's still that hard part where you have to navigate like, yeah, but it still sucks. Yeah. Like it's still hard.
It still sucks. And I still have to look at my own shit, not just like, oh, I understand you now. It's like,
yeah,
right?
That's where the accountability comes in, where you, at some point, you just have to take accountability for your own actions. You have to be like, okay, I can spend the next, and truthfully, I probably, there was at some point, who knows, right? We could probably pluck it out of the timeline if we had the ability to, but where I just started being accountable. It's like I finally just gave up the facade of everything that I was trying to hide from and just started taking accountability for it all. And that was really hard and really scary, because what that feels like is that I'm going to lose everything. And I can relate that to being a kid, where it's like, I remember if I tell the truth about this thing, not only am I going to get in trouble, but getting in trouble equals losing love. Mm-hmm. Like my little kid brain thinks, if I admit to this thing, they're going to be mad at me. And yeah, I might get hit, I might get hurt, I might, be yelled at, I might go sent to my room, all of these things. But on a real basic level, what I'm afraid of is they're no longer going to love me. And that means like my parents or my siblings, right? They're just no longer going to love me. And if I'm not loved, then it's like the end all be all worst thing ever. And so that's what, manifests as an adult, where if I eventually am accountable for all of my wrongdoings or my actions, then you're not going to love me anymore. And that was like the scariest thing in the whole wide world. But you have to like face it. You have to go through
scary.
It. What does it feel like for you? Is it similar, like that deep-seated, like underneath it all?
Yeah, it's the violence was a big one for me, but like since that wasn't an issue here, it came down to being abandoned and like just not being loved. Yeah, like losing the safe place, losing the happiness, losing the hope, losing all of that. So as little accountability as you had to take and the more that I could take for you meant that the safe place that I created was still here, which is terribly toxic. It was terribly toxic. Like I was a huge enabler in that sense of
we were a perfect pair, babe.
We were a perfect pair.
We matched up and fit perfectly.
It's really incredible that like I hope that this is a takeaway of how hopeless a relationship can be, in a sense that when both people start being accountable for themselves and take the action to start working on themselves, it's possible to completely transform.
It is possible.
Because we are. But speaking of that, like we've mentioned the abuse and violence and how that comes up. When you're in an abusive relationship, in a violent relationship, that's not the time. Like when you are the victim of abuse, you are experiencing that. It's not the time for you to say, what do I need to be accountable for? How is this my fault? Because you're already doing that. You're already taking all the responsibility likely for that, and they're not having any of it. But regardless, that's not the time. That is a time that you need to get yourself to safety. And this might have been bringing up things, because we've talked about that throughout. So if this is like triggering you with that, or you know somebody that's in this situation, like take care of yourself. Like take a moment to take care of yourself and what you need. But there's resources out there. And it's important that you start reaching out for resources. So one of the easiest ones to go to is the hotline.org. And we can put that in the show notes, right? I have that. So it's thehotline.org, and it just starts you off with resources. And it even has safety features built in. So if somebody walks in, you hit escape twice and it just takes that page off. It doesn't drop it to catch night, it just goes to the Google homepage or whatever your homepage is. Or you can hit the X. You can also text you can text START to 88788. And if you go to the website, they have the ability to chat there where you can start asking questions and start getting help. Because when you're in that, you feel so isolated. You feel like everything is your fault. It's embarrassing. You're scared. You don't know where to start. And just starting by saying it to somebody, just starting by reaching out to an organization that is literally built around helping is a start. It's not asking you to go to your local police or you just get a start in a space that you get to feel safe to start looking at and going. And they also have a phone number. And so we'll put all of that in the show notes, and so you can go from there. But the website, hotline.org, and you can text START to 88788 to start that process for yourself.
Resources. Yeah. Good resources. So our next tip, we're moving on from accountability because you have to be accountable first and foremost. Next up is clear communication. And again, like you might roll your eyes at like, okay, right. Tell me I got to communicate healthy in a relationship and how important it is. We're telling you how significant and how important it is and how crucial it is. But first and foremost, we want to talk to why communication is so difficult for people and why it's so hard to clearly communicate, not just what we're feeling emotionally, but oftentimes just regular old talking and communication. And it's because of your nervous system, and it's because of what's happening to your body in those subconscious moments and what's happening to your body chemically and what's happening to all of these different things. And so when we think about our nervous system, and this has been a lot of what we've worked on for a very long time, but you've got those 4 nervous system responses. So you've got the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And we've all probably heard of those in some capacity. But if you think about it, and if you truthfully sit down, and you can do this through that accountability process, if you think about how frequently you're in one of those activated states, what is your body physically doing in those moments? A lot of times you're breathing shallowly, you're not present, if you're dissociated a lot and you're in your head a lot, if you're tense a lot. All of these things are indications that your nervous system is activated. And when your nervous system is activated, you don't have full capacity of your brain. There's parts of your brain that kind of get shut off during those moments because you're in this survival response, and other parts of your brain that will actually get hyperactive. So I think it's the amygdala is that part of your brain that will go online in those activated moments because it's your fight or flight response is coming from there. That's what's controlling your survival. And all of those things are happening through evolution and because of evolution, but it's really important that you have awareness of your own nervous system first and foremost, especially when it comes to talking about any sort of like difficult things in relationships. Do you want to say anything about that, babe?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So no. Yeah, right. Here we go. I got it. Just another fact, like if you've experienced trauma and that it completely, like it removes more often that your logical thinking, your cognitive thinking, your calm thinking. And so the amygdala has more of a presence in this. So you're more led by emotions and reactions on this. And the calm rational isn't as strong. So there's a couple of different types of trauma. There's acute trauma, which is a single event. There's
like a car accident or
a single terrible event.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's chronic, which is multiple or repeated events. And that comes a lot with domestic violence and abuse. And then there's complex, which is a multitude and a mixture of all of these over extended periods of time. And so the more trauma that you have in your system, the less clear, cognitive, calm, rational thinking comes first. And the more of your reaction area, amygdala, hippocampus, well, I guess the amygdala with that coming through with that emotional response, And that it's like when you're in that event, when you're in that traumatic event, it's the hippocampus, I believe, that is really online for that part, that is storing the memory, which is what's going to come up and attribute singular moments to having flashbacks. That's where the flashbacks come in. It's where when you get triggered or activated by anything, that you attach it to a past memory, because that's the association that's making. So the clear thinking goes off on that, and then you're in the reactionary the moment with it. So trying to clearly communicate during that is, you can see how that would be incredibly challenging, because that is literally offline.
The other thing is, so much of communication is nonverbal. And so it's not necessarily what you're saying or what you're not saying, but it's how you're holding your body, and it's how you're moving, and it's how you're breathing. And we're all wired in some capacity to pay attention to those things, because like at the end of the day, we're still animals. And so we have to kind of pay attention to those subtle cues that are taking place. But if you honestly think about it, everybody has that experience where you walk into a room and you can tell that, there was just suddenly an argument into the room. Or if somebody comes home from work, you can sense that they had a bad day even before they've said something. We all have that ability to tap in and connect to the subtler things that are going on with a person by the way that they're moving, by the way that they're speaking even, right? They might pretend to be speaking calmly and rationally, but you can tell by the tone of their voice that they are, in fact, maybe they're upset or scared or angry. That subconscious ability that we all have plays such a role in how we communicate with each other. And we know that, I think a lot of people would agree that it's like, yeah, nonverbal communication is just as important as verbal communication. But what does that mean, and how do you bring awareness to that? For us, it's starting with the nervous system and really being able to take accountability for what you're feeling and how you're feeling, because you're not going to be able to communicate clearly. You're not going to be able to communicate your thoughts or your emotions if you're in those activated states. So a lot of times before we're having hard conversations, or even just like important conversations about stuff, we will check in with each other and say, hey, I want to talk about something. Are you up for it? Are you opting into this conversation? And the other person takes a moment and assesses where they're at. And it's basic need stuff like, well, right now I have to pee, or I'm hungry, or I'm really tired. We try to avoid having hard conversations at night, like after about 7:00 at night, because we just know that we aren't in our full capacity. Our brain is starting to go to sleep. We're already, tired and worn out from the day. And a lot of people, that's when you have those hard conversations, is at the end of the night, especially if you've got kids. And we know what that's like when all of our kids were young, living in the same house. That's when we would have hard conversations, is when we were laying in bed at night. And that's the worst time to have it, because you're not fully cognitive. You don't have your full awareness.
And you're more activated at that point because you are tired.
Right.
It's a tired cranky. You've been going all day.
So we stopped having those hard conversations at night. And we actually will set up times to have hard conversations. So it's like, hey, we're going to have this conversation on Saturday morning when we have all of our needs met, when we have cleared our plates, and we can show up with our full capacity. That means that our brain is completely online, our nervous systems are regulated, and now we can show up in that space. And part of being able to do that is being accountable for your own physical body and what you're actually feeling.
And you have to leave it at that, not micromanage and like check with your partner. Have you ate? Are you tired? Or like that, let them take care of themselves and you take care of you in that space. You're both agreeing that you're coming to that space in accountability and in integrity.
And I think like how you navigate hard conversations, how you clearly communicate in relationships, those things become like the actual words or the techniques that you would use, because there's 1,000 of those, right? There's so many different ways to have hard conversations. There's so many different things to talk about, or how to talk about, or use these 3 tips for this. All of those things become less important if you prioritize this beginning portion of really being aware of what your nervous system is doing and where you're coming from, and having a really good understanding of what your triggers are, having a really good understanding of what your body actually does when it's activated. There'll be times where we're in the middle of a conversation, and like one of the very first things that I use now is, you will trigger me And I'll even have it happen where I don't have cognitive awareness of it, where I'm not consciously aware of, you just said something that upset me. But what I become cognitively aware of is suddenly my thought process is looking to argue with everything that you're saying. So everything that you say, I can't hear it. All I hear is all my yeah buts. I'm like, oh, well, of course you would say that. Of course you're going to, you're going to bring up that now? That's how you're going to say that thing to me? I just saw how you shifted in your chair. That's what you're doing? That
Right?
Conversation starts in my head.
When you start arguing with them in your head, get really mad.
As soon as I have awareness that you're arguing with me, like in my head, right?
Yeah.
That part happens. That's my key to know I'm dysregulated.
Yeah.
Something's going on in my nervous system now, which means I know that parts of my brain are shutting down, like the full faculty. Like if I had, this boardroom full of like all the best thinkers in the world, like they're out to lunch. They took a smoke break and now we're getting like the brawlers in there that are just wanting to create chaos. And
Come on, get it on.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm going into that part of my brain, that lizard part of my brain, the monkey brain that is just ready to fight and survive. And so I'm looking to point out all of your faults. I'm looking to call out, you think that's an issue? What about 2 weeks ago? We still haven't talked, all of those things start happening. And that's my notice. And this is the other big thing when it comes to, like, for us, clear communication involves being able to push pause, being able to say, I'm activated. I need to walk away from this conversation. And we started doing that several years ago, and it just made everything so much safer and so much better because it gives everybody the break that they actually need to regulate the nervous system again. But there's a couple of things to it where whoever is the person to push pause on the conversation is the person that has to come back to the conversation and say, hey, thank you for this. I'm ready to have this conversation now if you're ready. Yeah. And so that's a really big key thing too as well. But it really comes down to being able to check in with where you're at, and then learning how to communicate with each other becomes much easier because you're kind of on the same page with each other. We're both doing this thing where we're checking in with ourselves and seeing where we're at and being able to communicate those needs. And then you're able to connect much deeper with each other and have much harder conversations and even lighter. Like our level of intimacy has gone up since we've started communicating in this way because it doesn't always involve having to talk about hard things.
Right. And like the important thing I think here to really like kind of go in, and this also works for neurospicy friends, because this is like hard all the time. This clear communication is hard a lot of times when you always have that activation and trying to figure out how to like watch your body language and not be completely like hooked onto their body language. It's like all of this that we're hearing, that we practice, we communicate with each other in non-activated times. So being like first of all, having awareness of your triggers, that goes back into that accountability, having that stuff, knowing yourself is when I'm activated, I need things to be literal, or I take things literal. So speaking in metaphors confuses me. It agitates me. It's like I feel like manipulated. I need things to be short and be literal. And when I am feeling activated, I need to take a break. When I need to excuse myself for the conversation, I need to say pause. And so having these conversations ahead of time, instead of trying to get all of this going in your brain, which this is a lot. It's like baby steps on how you want to show up in conversations. But having all of this just happen, and then when you're in the middle of the conversation, implementing all of these things and have your partner not know what's going on or not knowing how to respond or why you're walking away is going to activate them as well. So when you're not activated, being like, I want to try communicating this way. I've recognized that when we're having hard conversations and I start to get activated, that I start to blame you for everything. I start to think that everything is your fault. I quit talking. I shut down. I just want to leave. Like all of these things that come up when you're saying, I notice that I do this when, so I want to practice this so I can show up as my best self for you in our relationship, in these conversations. You're bringing it to them with like, I've got this plan and this is what I'm seeing in myself. How does that feel within you? You're getting them on board because you're not starting off with, you get activated, you're triggering me when you do this. You're like, this is what I see. This is what's going on in me, in my body. And I want to show up for you this way because you really matter to me. And I want to be able to hear you when you're communicating your feelings. So I'm going to start practicing this for me. What does this feel like for you? What are your experiences when we have hard conversations? What does it feel like for you when we're in these moments? Does any of this resonate? So you're starting to ask questions about them and listening to their answers, not telling them how you have perceived in the story that you've created their feeling and acting.
Listening,
yes,
is the other really big key that I want to mention. The vast majority of our relationship has been us waiting for our turn to talk. And if you really want to improve communication, if you've gone through and you're accountable to yourselves, you're accountable to each other, you have a really good awareness of your nervous system and how it gets dysregulated, and you are checking in with yourself on a regular basis, and you're doing all of these things in order to really show up and have better relationships, just listen. Just listen. And stop trying to think about what you're going to say next or hold on to the piece of the conversation that you want to come back to. Just honestly and genuinely show up and listen to your partner and listen to the people that you're in relationships with. And it makes such a drastic difference because you don't have to do anything else. Like the vast majority of the time, people just want to be heard and they want to be seen and they want to be validated. And in doing that, you're telling them that they're safe and that you love them and that they're okay, which helps their nervous systems regulate. So much of your problems could just be solved if you just listened more. Your partner definitely doesn't want you to fix everything. They oftentimes just need to be heard. And so listening is such an important key. And it's less about what you're saying and how you're saying it, and more about just actually becoming a really, really good listener and being able to sit with somebody in their emotions while they're talking and communicating. And the last thing about listening is also recognizing that you have trauma ears. So it's like I was saying earlier, where all I can hear is all of the things that you're like, I'll hear you talk to me sometimes and all I'm hearing is you criticizing me.
Yeah.
And I know that you're not, but those are like my trauma ears that are on because I'm in those activated moments. And that's all that I'm hearing is all the things that I'm doing wrong. And then I'm becoming very, very defensive. So you have to be able to recognize when you're in those activated states.
Yeah.
So hopefully these have helped.
I've got one more for listening that I just had awareness of. Because,
I'm listening.
Are you listening? There's this, like when you said, when you're really listening, you're not just waiting for your turn to speak. And like I've heard that and I recognize that, but that one didn't really align with me completely because I feel like a lot of it, I'm not waiting for my turn to speak. So it was like, what is it for me? Because I'm definitely not listening. And then when like in that activation, right, in those like crappy moments of not hearing when I've got my trauma ears on. And what I start to do is I start to listen very closely for the things that I'm expecting you to say, the hints in the variation, the voice. I start to listen for whatever comes up like that is going to validate the narrative that I've created, the story that I've created, that then allows me to and disengage. So it's not only good when you're listening, not just listening to prove the storyline that you've got going on that's creating distance and conflict, like you're listening from their point of view, like you have never heard it before. You're listening to really hear their experience and see if you can hear what they're trying to communicate about their feelings. Not, I knew it. Now I'm disengaging and taking off, or, oh, I've got something to say to you. So listening to really hear, not validating your story as well.
Good stuff, babe.
Yeah.
It's really good stuff. So radical accountability, clear communication. Hopefully this sparks some new ideas for you. That's one of the big things that we want to do with the podcast is just shift the way that you might be looking at your life right now so that you can hopefully create not just better relationships, but your best life imaginable. That's the goal with the podcast. We really, really appreciate everybody for tuning in. We're super excited. We've gotten a lot of love and support for the podcast so far, and we cannot wait to see. Like, we got big dreams with this show, and you're a part of it out there. So if you're here and you're a fan of this show and you enjoy it, please share it with somebody. Share this episode. Send it to somebody that you think is going to benefit. Send it to everybody that you can imagine.
Yeah.
Like, no harm in that whatsoever. And
if you liked it, listen to it again. Maybe there's something else you heard.
You can reach out as well. You can follow us everywhere on social, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, steph&craig.co, Send us emails. We want your input on what this episode, what resonated with you and what didn't. What else, babe? Anything else?
I think that's it. Let's go.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you so much, everybody. We're super excited.
Yeah. We love you. We believe in you. And we believe that healing is possible when we do it together.
So come with us, and we'll see you guys next week. Expect the best. Expect the best and plan for the greatest. That's our tagline at the end of every episode. Yeah. So eventually we'll get it figured out.
We will.
We'll see you all next week.
Wait and see, you and me, we were meant to be.
We want to make something perfectly clear. This podcast is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as a substitute for professional advice. We're sharing with you our own personal experiences and insights, things we have found to be helpful on our healing journey. But we are not licensed therapists. If you need help, it's important to seek out a qualified professional. Remember, we believe that we all do better when we heal together. See you soon.